were just having a vocabulary lesson before we went on live, or recorded, not live. And it's amazing to me. So y'all can't see Amy Jordan, who's in the production part of the podcast. You see Kevin Ezel, you see me, and we've been trying to improve our vocabulary. So we've been testing each other on vocabulary words. And I got to say, both Kevin and Amy did extraordinarily well. They responded quickly, and just want to let the listening audience know that Kevin Ezel, okay, he may be the president of North American Mission Board, but he knows his vocabulary. And even though you can't see Amy Jordan, she knows her vocabulary too. And we'll continue to expand upon that. But that's not why you're here. You're here to listen to Revitalize and Replant, sponsored by the North American Mission Board and churchreplanters.com. Just keep this in mind when you're thinking about North American Mission Board. They're about church planting. They're about church replanting. They're about evangelism. They're about disaster relief or sin relief. They are really on the cutting edge of a lot of things. Go visit them on the Replanter side at churchreplanters.com. And just to see information about North American Mission Board at namb.net or nam.net. Well, I'll say good afternoon to you, Kevin, because we're recording it on the afternoon, regardless of when someone is listening. You are obviously in your Alpharetta office.
Absolutely. Ready to roll. Just got back from the airport, which is a typical part of my life. So
I don't travel by airplane nearly as much as I used to. So we at Church Answers opened an office in Nigeria, and we got a great guy leading it. Nigeria is going to be the most populated Christian nation in the world in 7 more years.
That's phenomenal.
We're trying to be there to help in any way we can. And
so you drive there? Is that your point? You're going to drive there?
I'm going to drive via the internet. They're encouraging me. The Nigerians are encouraging me to come in March. But Amy, I know you're looking at me. I have been a little bit on the hesitant side to do so at this part. So we'll see. We'll see what's going on. Hey, we got a 3-part series coming up. This is going to be fun. So you're going to be listening to Kevin Ezel and to me about what the series is when a church is looking for a pastor. And we'll be approaching it from 3 ways. Part 1, obviously, is today, what to do when the interim pastor wants to become the pastor. That happens a lot. I am so glad that didn't happen to me when Kevin Ezel became the pastor. They didn't ask me, by the way, so that wasn't even an issue. Part 2 is when a church is looking for a pastor, how to be considered to be a pastor of another church. And part 3 of when a church is looking for a pastor, how to evaluate at a church that is contacting you about being its pastor. We're having fun with these 3-part series, Kevin.
Yeah, I always have fun when I get to hang out with you for a few minutes.
Oh, it's all good. And thank you for the vocabulary lessons. It's been great. Okay, let's get into this. So here's a scenario to all of you listeners. The church is looking for a pastor. Obviously, that means that church is without someone as pastor. So the church is looking for a pastor. The church brings in an interim pastor, someone to be there between the former pastor and the next pastor. But the church, the interim pastor, decides that he wants to be the pastor. And the church on the front end has not said anything. They should have. They haven't made him or asked him to sign a statement that he would not be pastor. They haven't taken a stand that he couldn't be. So now the interim pastor is saying, I really want to be considered as pastor. Some of them are presumptuous enough to say, I want to be the pastor. Pretty common situation, Kevin?
No, absolutely. And what's sad is what you just said. So many churches don't think on the front end to have a guy sign a commitment not to. Or even to, sometimes I've heard them say, well, I signed an agreement that said I wouldn't be considered, but because as well as I do, when you're an interim, you're never more on a white horse undeservedly than when you're an interim.
I know.
Come in there
I could do nothing wrong at Highview than the 1 year that I was there, and then you came along and showed them that it's possible to do wrong.
No, yeah, exactly. They kept reminding me how you did nothing wrong for several years. I know the books you read, you preached through Acts, and I remember all the different bragging on you. But the problem is you've just got to get all that nailed down on the very front, and that they don't play the system because it's not helpful at all. If they're truly going to be a transitional pastor, interim, they need to be transitional. And
Hey, expand on that you just said about I think I know where you're going on this, about them playing the system. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, people go in there, they know how to play. People, you're on a white horse. People are going to compliment you. You should be our next pastor. Again, they're always going to round up. They don't really mean it, but and then you say, well, I told them I wouldn't consider it, or I don't think I would, or I signed that, so I'm kind of bound, and playing it that way. See, Hy-Vee was smart when they got you, because they knew they couldn't afford you to be. And so it wasn't even an option. You didn't want to take the pay cut. They couldn't afford it, so it was never even on the table.
They never ever mentioned it to me. They did not want me. Hey, a white knight on a horse. You're too young to remember the Monkey song "Daydream Believer."
Oh no, I remember that. Yeah.
And Amy's saying she remembers it. Do you remember the thesis of that song? I like to get the meanings behind it. You remember the part, you once thought of me as a white knight on a steed, white knight on a horse.
Huh.
You remember that? Okay. Well, the scenario is a married couple. Their relationship has fizzled, and she remembers the past when she was homecoming queen. And he is always daydreaming about the future. Neither one of them are in the present. So daydream believer and a homecoming queen. So I'm teaching you things you do not know. Isn't that right?
That's gonna cost me what, $1.09 when I get on my I'll download that song on the way home.
That's right. That song and their very unplayed song "When Love Comes Knocking at Your Door" are my two favorites by the Monkees. Most people know "Daydream Believer." Very few know "When Love Comes Knocking at Your Door."
You can play that song when another church starts pursuing you to be pastor.
Oh yeah, you're getting us back on track. Exactly, you're getting us back on track. All right, so we got the scenario. The church is looking for a pastor. The interim pastor said, "I want to be the pastor." What are some options? Well, obviously, Kevin, the church can just say no.
Right, exactly.
And that's probably what you're going to say. They should say. I don't know. I don't want to speak for you.
No, absolutely. They should say no. I just think you hopefully find an interim pastor, if they're wise, that's just going to tee the ball up for the next guy. And the whole time he's trying to solve some problems, hopefully some issues, and help them think through some things that will be helpful. But it's all in getting the right guy. As you know, they're very hard to find, though.
Yes.
Because, finding somebody who can give that much time, most guys who want to do interims are booked for a while. And people just want someone to fill the pulpit.
Also available.
And I think, one of the worst things to do is for them to line up. And I know we're not talking about how to do interim, but to have a different guy every week, I just don't think that's helpful. Because then it's almost a lineup, and then everybody starts picking out which one they like the most.
Oh yeah, it becomes a beauty contest at that point, and many of the people coming in don't even know they're in the contest.
Well, there's no sense of continuity. It doesn't help the church at all. So I think you're right on here. The very first thing you should do is just say no. And hey, the second part, if that's what you really want to do, then hey, you make the decision. I would say the same thing to a staff person that wants to be the pastor.
Yes.
Then you got to be all in or all out. If you're going to be in, then you're probably going to need to transition after that process if you don't get it.
Yeah, because a couple of things. First of all, the pastor's coming in and the staff person saying, "I wanted your position and I wish you didn't have it." So that's one statement. And the other statement is they see their present staff position as a consolation prize. It's not really what they want, but they'll hang on to that. Something else comes along.
Well, and typically in those situations, there's typically one or two committee members that really did prefer that to get that person, and that never bids well for the next pastor. I've just rarely ever seen that work. So I think you're right. You say no, and you just ask the interim, hey, if you want to be considered, then resign as interim and put your resume in. But
my guess is number one is going to be so dominant in your choices on here that the other choices are really subsets or subservient to the first choice.
Do you know what I found? Those committees have such a hard time saying no, and so often they'll give it a lot more attention than it really deserves, and causes more problems than it should. So,
well, let's before we go to the third point, let's talk a little bit about the interim. So someone comes to you and they say, "We're going. I've been invited to be interim of whatever church. What are a few things that you would tell that interim?"
Well, to maximize the opportunity, to help the next guy as best he possibly could, and to everything would be about setting him up. I got to do one in Nashville at Long Hollow before Robbie Galladay went there.
Yeah.
10 months, and really, I was just trying to help them grieve the loss of their former pastor
Who died.
Passed, and then prepare them that, hey, look, there's a time, it's a new season and a new day, and prep the new guy for success. And the whole time realize, again, if you take all those affirmations that you get, you gotta divide by at least 2 or 3. You get down to reality,
10 or 20, 10 or 20 probably.
Huh?
10 or 20 probably.
Yeah.
I mean, an interim, I think I was interim of 11 churches. I'd have to go back and count during the time I was dean at Southern. And with one exception, they all told me how great I was. They told me how wonderful I was. And you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of my grandkids.
Yeah.
They don't think I do anything wrong. They think I'm great. Why? Because I get them gifts, coffee, and sugar when they're not supposed to have it.
Exactly.
They stay up late. And so, but what do I do when they start getting a little ornery? I just return them to their children. I mean, to their parents. Yeah. So, and they're like a grandparent. You're going to always be loved because you don't have to say no. Yeah.
And so I found if you love those people during that time, that's really till they just have us keep them together, keep them. But if you can address some of the real hard issues, so often an interim can say things that a pastor could never say. And so and that means even if you say, hey, look, how are you treating your next pastor? You could set him up to be taken care of better.
That's right.
And ask those questions that are awkward and get them to talk about it. Because, you'd be surprised how often they just don't think to even discuss those things.
So interim is a preacher, a coach, a consultant, and a counselor.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah. And I found sometimes where they just want a talking head, like, look, we've got an executive pastor. We just need to come in here, just preach. The staff has it. It's like, okay, I can. I don't do interims anymore, but it's a real blessing to be able to walk a church through a transitional time, though.
I think of the example of Long Hollow. They had a great pastor who died.
Yeah.
And they have a great pastor who succeeded him, which was a great situation. So you must have done something right. And
they're two very different personalities.
Yes.
One was like Jeff Foxworthy, gone pulpit. And then Robbie was more of a professor type, a disciple. And they're both incredibly well fit for the seasons they were in. And so
both have done an incredible job at that church.
Yeah, incredible job.
All right, this third point, you try to get the why behind this move. Maybe so, maybe not. I don't even know if it's worth the step to talk to the interim and say, tell me why you're doing this at this point.
Yeah, why you're doing the wanting to be the pastor, or why you're doing
why you want to be the pastor. What's happening here? Why didn't we talk about this at the beginning? And he's probably going to say, well, I've been affirmed by so many people.
Yeah.
I didn't expect this.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I always hope in that is they don't try to this could be taken the wrong way, but sometimes people they automatically go, well, the Lord's really been working in my heart. The Lord's really been.
They over-spiritualize it. You're right.
Over-spiritualize it and say, look, he may be, but don't use that as an ace of king of spades, where you're going to just throw it out there. And then, well, if that's the case, we really do need to consider it. And that's very manipulative by some. And the Lord does lead. He does do all that. But you just got to be careful.
I'm not taking your comment at all to suggest that the Holy Spirit is not working in this. But some people can just simply say that and not really mean it.
Yeah, well, I remember when I went you'd have pulpit committees ask you as a potential pastor, do you feel the Lord leading you here? And I said, perhaps after you invite me. I don't want to put you where you gotta. If I say yes, you feel obligated, or if
we got to call him. God's already talked to him.
Yeah, and so it was like, man, I don't. Yeah.
Sometimes, and maybe it does happen at times, but sometimes there's this perception that when a pastor goes to a church, it is an unequivocal Damascus Road clear call. And sometimes it's just not quite that way. In fact, after you've been there 6 months, you're thinking, what was I thinking?
No, absolutely. Well, and sometimes, sadly enough, I just talked to a pastor that went through, he hasn't been there very long, and he just got transitioned out and ended up not being the fit he thought it was. And the church saw that it was not a fit. And so it's very, very different. I just encourage a church to take their time during these. I know everybody wants the pastor, wants them fast, but it's better to measure twice and cut once. Take your time.
That is a Kevin Ezelism
right guy.
if I've heard one.
Do what now?
That's a Kevin Ezelism if I've ever heard one.
Yeah, I took shop as a senior in high school. And
I should have. I don't have a manual bone in my body. I mean, I had my sons here over Christmas holidays, and there was a light bulb out, and Jess just declared to everybody, "Don't let Dad touch it."
That's right.
One of us has to get it.
That's right.
I could have taken a lot of shop. This number 4 on here, you could let him be a backup if the first round of candidate does not engender fruit. Haven't seen it hardly at all. I've seen it once and it worked. That doesn't mean it should be a principle, but I saw it work one time when they went through a first round of candidates. And I will say this, that particular interim was not pushing for it, but after they'd gone a year or so, they just said, is it a possibility? And one thing led to another. But this candidate never did say, I want to be pastor. So that's the difference. Our podcast right now is what to do when the interim pastor wants to become the pastor. So there's a difference there.
Sure. And I think I'd just say to someone, it'll be so obvious that it's just not a thing, in that kind of situation where, okay, we've made an attempt to try to find the right guy. We really do feel like you're him. And you've seen those cases where people go back to a guy a second or a third time, and it'll be so obvious to me that you'll know. I just think where I have more troubles when the pastor himself, the interim pastor, tries to manipulate the system, and that's what you see. Is like, man, this looks like pretty good. They start, hearing those affirmations and thinking this could really work out. It's going to be like this all the time. And then when you become the pastor, you have to actually start making decisions that matter, and then it's not the same.
So where do churches get interim pastors? There's the denominational perspective, and then there's those that are not denominational. Where are you seeing it happen? In Louisville, it was, I don't want to say it was easy, but it was easier because you had a seminary there, you had the state convention there. But where are they getting? Where are they getting pastors these days?
Yeah, I found that we get calls all the time from guys who just recently retired from the pastorate, and it's like, look, I'm retired, but I want to preach, I want to lead and love people, just not full time, and I'd love to take some pastors. So we have a whole list of somebody calls, and we give them a list of 4 or 5 names they could potentially consider. So a lot of retired guys. I'm amazed at sometimes the amount of money churches spend to get a guy there, to fly some of these guys in and put them up in a hotel and all those things, to have and I understand, they want to make sure they get if they can, but
they can get expensive every week.
It can. Yeah. And it just seems like, but again, you got to be real careful about using staff in these particular positions, because then that can work itself into be a challenge as well.
Hey, that brings up a situation. I was one of the churches where I served as interim was Far Hills in Dayton, Ohio.
Yeah.
Kenny Mahanes was pastor.
Yeah.
Then I came in for the interim period. Brad Wagner was the executive pastor.
Yeah.
And they asked him to be the interim, and he said no.
Yeah.
He never thought he would want to be a candidate. In fact, he had declared that he would most likely leave when the next pastor came, because he was Kenny's XP, and he ended up leaving to go to Southern Seminary. But he actually said, I am not going to be. He told the search committee, I'm not going to preach. We're going to find someone else. And that's when he met me and I met him. And as he will testify on more than one occasion, his life has been downhill ever since that moment.
That's right. Which brings you back to the song, Two Less Lonely People in the World, right? I guess you guys meet up there. And not
No,
bingo.
no,
Okay.
no. Let's go back. Let's go back to Daydream Believer.
That what really is neat to see how God brings people in your life at different stages. Even Wagner, I mean, I love him. He just orchestrates certain things and uses situations to some of your best friends you may not even know yet.
Yes. Well,
Not you. You don't get out
at
of
my age, I better hurry up. Number 5, you could ask him to leave the church for making such an unwise request. That's a pretty dramatic move, but I guess if there's other complicating issues, it could be the proverbial straw that brought the camel's back.
Yeah, you could. I mean, that would be that's the nuclear option, obviously. And but that's where if he's just being overly manipulative.
That's true.
Because most guys are smart enough to be subtly manipulative, but he's overly manipulative.
What is worse? What's the greater sin? Overly manipulation or subtle manipulation?
I think both, but
Exactly.
but to be overly like that, you'd have to, just for the health of the church, for a guy to use it for the wrong reason.
So when you said that you and them get calls about interim pastors, is it primarily people who want to be interim pastors or churches looking for interim pastors?
Yeah, both. We get a lot of calls from guys wanting to be interim pastors. They know we connect with a lot of churches all across North America and said, hey, look, can you put my name on the list to recommend? And we said, sure. Like I just got a call this week from a church in Vermont, another church in Tennessee. There's a church in Kentucky. It's we're not even 2 or 3 days into the week. And so that happens every week. But then at least once a week, we'll have somebody who say, hey, could you put my name on the list? And it's mainly just because we have contact with so many churches. Sure. And what's really interesting? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. There's in Kansas, there's a pastor who has he's packaged it so these small churches in Kansas can put up Apple TV and video him his sermon. They just pull him down and use his sermon. And there are several. He's the interim pastor of several churches
through video.
And it's Andy Addis is his name. It's incredible. And he started several campuses. I mean, it's amazing. He didn't charge them. It's like, look, it's a sermon. You can use it. And they found that they have people who can do the pastoral part, but not the preaching part. And the churches are of a size saying, hey, look, we're not really used to doing by video, but they get a high quality sermon. They'll never be able to find a high quality, high capacity leader like Andy, perhaps, but they've utilized them. And then they've actually assimilated some of those churches into become campuses eventually, because they're like, this really works.
I wondered about that, because once you get him preaching and then you start looking at who's going to be next, it may be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm saying there's a lot of creative ways of doing it. I think that's one of really good options personally, but church has to be ready for it.
We are talking to Kevin E. Zell. This is the first of a three-part series entitled When a Church is Looking for a Pastor. We've been looking at kind of the niche, or niche, if you prefer that, issue of what to do when the interim pastor wants to become the pastor. And we've looked at 5 possible responses, and Kevin has done a very good job of giving us really the overall view of this and say, yeah, that's a good option. That's not such a good option, or that's the nuclear option. So Kevin, we're going to continue this series. We'll be looking at part 2 of the series, how to be considered to be pastor of another church. You have just mentioned that a lot of people say, will you put me on the list? Well, undoubtedly you get calls regularly of, look, I feel like it's time to leave. What's the best thing for me to do?
Right.
Go to the guru of all pastors in the world, Kevin E. Zell, President of North American Mission Board.
Oh, yeah.
So come back for part 2 of this series, When the Church is Looking for a Pastor, and we'll be talking about how to be considered as a pastor of another church. Hey, remember to give us a rating and review. If you're listening to us on podcasts, if you're on the iTunes channel, just let us know that you are liking us there. and that you can subscribe as well. So please subscribe too. And we're going to continue to have these mini series. I think you're going to enjoy them because we're able to have some continuity, whereas we've been chopping them up every week before this. We may not do it all the time, but we're going to continue to look at doing it. So thank you for joining us today on Revitalize and Replant, where we're helping churches get healthier together.